A wife should fear her husband, my husband smirked, slapping me on the back of the head in front of our guests and ordering me to bring him a beer. I lived in a cocoon of silence, woven from fear and shame. My world had shrunk to the size of our small apartment, where every corner bore the imprint of cruelty and humiliation. My husband, Ian, was a virtuoso at juggling masks. For outsiders, he was cheerful, sociable, the life of the party. At home, however, he turned into a despot whose words wounded more sharply than a knife. He belittled me, ridiculed my hobbies, and questioned my intelligence. And all of this was often seasoned with cynical jokes that, in the company of friends, sounded like innocent teasing, but for me, were painful blows to my self-esteem. I learned not to argue, not to object, not to show my true feelings. Over the years of our marriage, my voice became quiet, almost inaudible, my movements restrained and cautious. I was afraid of doing something wrong. I was afraid of provoking another fit of anger. I lived in constant tension, as if on a minefield where every careless word or action could lead to an explosion. The most painful thing was that I could not share my pain with anyone. I was ashamed to admit that my life was not a happy family idyll, but a daily struggle for survival. Ashamed to tell my father, Sergei, about what my marriage had become. He, a former military man, had always been an example of strength and courage for me. I remembered how he had protected me from bullies in my childhood, how his firm word could pacify any troublemaker. And now, when I needed his support so much, I could not bring myself to ask for help. It seemed to me that admitting my weakness would be a blow to him, a disappointment. Ian regularly hosted noisy parties at home. He liked to be the center of attention, to demonstrate his dominance. On such evenings, I felt particularly vulnerable. In the circle of friends and acquaintances, Ian allowed himself even more liberties. His jokes became cruder and more humiliating. He could, for example, make me run to the kitchen several times for snacks, saying, "Why are you so slow, like a turtle? The guests are waiting." Or ridicule my cooking skills, even if the dish was perfectly prepared. I tried to ignore my husband's barbs, pretending to be cheerful and comfortable in this company. But inside, everything clenched with pain and resentment. I felt like a doll in someone else's theater, forced to play the role of a happy wife while my soul screamed in despair. Over time, I stopped inviting my friends and relatives to our home. I could not bear to see their sympathetic glances, to answer their routine questions about my family life. I was afraid that someone would notice my depressed state, that someone would try to find out the truth. It seemed to me that it was better to isolate myself from everyone than to risk being exposed. So I found myself in complete isolation. My world had shrunk to the walls of the apartment, my communication to short conversations with my husband and rare phone calls to my parents. I delved more and more into myself, into my thoughts and feelings. I tried to find solace in books, in needlework, in walks in the park, but nothing brought me real relief. The feeling of being at a dead end grew with each passing day. I understood that things could not go on like this, that I had to change something in my life. But fear paralyzed my will. I was afraid of the unknown, afraid of being alone, afraid of Ian's anger. I often remembered my life before marriage. I was a cheerful, sociable, self-confident girl. I had dreams, plans for the future. But all of that was in the past. My marriage to Ian seemed to have drained all the life out of me, turning me into a shadow of my former self. Sometimes, in moments of despair, it seemed to me that the only way out was to run away. To run away wherever my eyes would lead me, to start all over again. But I immediately dismissed these thoughts. Where would I run? I had no money, no job, no support. Besides, I would be tormented by guilt towards my parents. How would they take my decision? What would the neighbors and acquaintances say? I felt trapped in a cage with no way out. I knew that if I did not do something, my life would turn into an endless series of gray, joyless days. I had to find the strength to break out of this vicious circle. But how? Where could I find this strength? Every day was like the last, Waking up, breakfast, cleaning, cooking, waiting for my husband to come home from work. And every evening I lived in fear, waiting for another bout of his bad mood. I learned to predict his state from the slightest signs, the expression on his face, the intonation of his voice, the way he put a beer bottle on the table. I understood that my life was not a life, but an existence. I dreamed of something else, of love, of happiness, of freedom. But for now, all of this seemed unattainable. I continued to live in silence, waiting for a miracle that, I hoped, would one day happen. But the miracle did not happen, and I knew that if I did not take my life into my own hands, no one would help me. Another Friday evening in an apartment on the outskirts of the city was not much different from the previous ones. Again, guests, noisy conversations, the smell of cheap beer and cigarette smoke. Ian, as always, was the center of attention, telling his crude jokes, generously seasoned with poisonous sarcasm directed at me. I tried to be inconspicuous, to dissolve into the surroundings, but in vain. My fate was invariably to be the object of ridicule, a living target for Ian's jokes. I automatically refilled the guests' beers, cleared the empty plates, trying not to look Ian in the eye. Every glance, every word, every movement of his was like a punch to the gut. I felt cornered, like a wild animal caught in a trap. Suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, there was a slap. Ian, sitting at the head of the table, hit me on the back of the head with a swing. Not hard, more for show, demonstratively. "Where's the beer?" he roared, not taking his eyes off his friends. "Do I have to get it myself?" In that instant, something inside me broke. The long-standing habit of obeying, of enduring, of being silent. It all crumbled in an instant. I did not move. I stood as if rooted to the spot, with an empty bottle in my hand, unable to utter a word. My head was buzzing, my vision darkened. The face of my father, Sergei, appeared before my inner eye, stern, taciturn, but always fair and reliable. I remembered my childhood years, when he protected me from any offense, when his word was law, and his presence was a guarantee of safety. A memory from childhood surfaced. A little me, frightened by a mean neighbor's dog, hiding behind my father's legs. Sergei, without a word, shoos the dog away with just a stern look. Back then, in my childhood, I felt completely protected. Why now, when I need protection so much, am I silent? Why did I not turn to my father sooner? Shame. A sticky, suffocating shame paralyzed my will. Shame for letting this happen. Shame for not being able to resist. Shame for being weak and helpless. It seemed to me that my father, upon learning the truth, would be disappointed in me. He would see not the successful, happy daughter I had always tried to appear as, but a pathetic, broken woman living in constant fear. But despite the shame, deep down there was hope. Hope that my father, as before, would come to my aid. Recently, having gathered my courage, I had sent him a message, short, rambling, full of omissions. But still, I told him about my life with Ian, about his cruelty and humiliation. I did not ask for help directly, just hinted that I was very unhappy. I knew the chances were slim. My father lived far away, he had his own worries, and the message would most likely get lost in the pile of daily affairs. But still, I hoped. Hope was the last thing I had left. And now, standing in the middle of the room, under the watchful eyes of the guests and Ian's malevolent gaze, I clearly remembered sending that message. I remembered how long I had hesitated to press the send button, how my hands had trembled. I remembered praying to God that my father would receive it and understand that I needed help. I had written to him, "Dad, I am having a very hard time. I do not know how to go on. I feel like I am drowning." I could not squeeze out anything more. The fear was too strong, the shame too great. At the moment when Ian was about to strike again, the doorbell rang. The bell sounded sharp and unexpected, like a gunshot. Everyone froze. Ian grumbled in annoyance. "Who could that be?" he muttered, heading for the door. I stood motionless, as if paralyzed. I did not know what to expect. Who could have come at such a late hour? Ian opened the door. On the threshold stood Sergey. I gasped. Not believing my eyes, I stared at my father. How did he get here? Had he really come? Sergey, tall, stately, with a military bearing, calmly surveyed the room. His eyes, piercing, gray as steel, unerringly assessed the situation. He immediately understood what was happening here, saw the fear in his daughter's eyes, the malice on his son-in-law's face, the awkward silence of the guests. There was no surprise or condemnation in his gaze, only firm resolve and unwavering confidence. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. All eyes were fixed on Sergey. Ian, taken aback by the surprise, stood as if rooted to the spot, unable to utter a word. The guests, holding their breath, watched the scene unfold. I looked at my father, and tears flowed down my cheeks on their own. Tears of relief, hope, gratitude. I knew that everything would be all right now. I was no longer alone. My father had come to protect me. Sergey entered the apartment as if it were an unfamiliar house, although he had been here more than once. But now everything seemed alien, saturated with tension and a kind of stuffy, suffocating silence. He slowly scanned the room, filled with faces that had frozen in unnatural poses. The guests, who a minute ago were chattering and clinking glasses, now seemed to have turned to stone, watching the unfolding scene. Their eyes showed a mixture of curiosity, awkwardness, and perhaps even fear. No one dared to break the silence that had fallen. Sergey's gaze lingered on me. I stood motionless, like a statue, with a flushed face and eyes full of tears. He saw in them not only fear, but also some hidden hope, a plea for help that I had hidden for so long. His heart ached with pain and anger. He had always known that something was not right with me, but I had always assured him that everything was fine. Now he saw the truth, and it was terrible. Then his gaze fell on Ian. My son-in-law stood frowning, with a feigned bravado on his face, but Sergey saw the fear in his eyes. He recognized that look. The look of a cornered animal trying to appear strong, but knowing deep down that it is trapped. Sergey slowly walked to the table, where snacks and bottles of alcohol were piled up. He took one of the beer bottles, the very one that, as he understood, had caused all the fuss. He slowly turned to Ian. There was no fuss or aggression in his movements, only a calmness that was more frightening than any scream. He placed the bottle in front of Ian so that he could not miss it. Then he looked him straight in the eye. Sergey's gaze was firm and piercing, like steel. There was no malice or hatred in it, only determination and a readiness to protect his daughter at any cost. Ian tried to save face. He smirked, but the smirk was crooked and forced. His voice trembled when he said, "Well, father-in-law, decided to stand up for your daughter? And she, you see, got offended that I asked her to bring me a beer." Sergey did not answer immediately. He continued to look at Ian, as if studying him. Then he slowly, clearly said, "If you raise a hand to her again, you raise a hand to me. Are you ready?" A deafening silence fell in the room. It seemed as if even the air had stopped moving. Everyone froze, waiting to see what would happen next. Ian looked away. He had not expected such a rebuff. He was used to me being silent and enduring, and to my father living far away and knowing nothing. But now a warrior stood before him, not an old man, ready to fight for his daughter. "Oh, come on, Sergey," one of the guests tried to defuse the situation. "Why are you being so serious? It was just a joke." Ian was just joking. "A joke?" Sergey asked, not taking his eyes off Ian. "Jokes are different. Some jokes can hurt very badly." He turned to Ian again and repeated, "Are you ready?" Ian was silent. He knew he had gone too far. He was used to impunity, but now he felt his power was under threat. He could not afford to lose face in front of his friends, but he did not want to mess with my angry father either. "Oh, for crying out loud," he mumbled. "I just got a little worked up. It is a party, after all." Sergey did not continue the conversation. He knew that the main thing now was to show Ian that he would not leave me in trouble. He went to his daughter, put his arm around her shoulders, and said quietly, "It is all right, Annie. I am here." I felt my body tremble. I could not hold back the tears. I had been waiting for this support, this protection for so long. It felt like I was drowning in a swamp of despair. And now, finally, a helping hand was extended to me. I pressed myself against my father and cried, not caring about the guests or Ian. I did not care what they thought. The main thing was that I was no longer alone. The guests silently watched the scene. Some of them, perhaps for the first time, thought about what was really happening in this family. They had only seen the outside, a successful man, a beautiful wife, a cozy apartment. But now they had seen the other side too: fear, humiliation, violence. The atmosphere in the room was so tense that it seemed a storm was about to break. But Sergey remained calm. He knew that the main thing now was not to let the situation get out of control. He took me aside, away from the guests. "Let's go, daughter," he said. "We need to talk." He led me into another room, leaving Ian and his friends in bewilderment. He knew that this evening would be a turning point in my life. He knew that I had to make a difficult decision, but he was sure that I would cope, because now I was not alone. I had him, my father, who would always be there to protect and support me. Left alone with me in the other room, Sergey sat me down on the sofa. He sat down next to me and took my hand in his. His touch was warm and calming. "Anna," he began quietly, "I know everything. You do not have to endure this anymore." I was silent, my head bowed. The tears continued to flow down my cheeks. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had been silent for so long. Ashamed that I had let Ian treat me this way. Ashamed that I had exposed myself in such an unflattering light in front of my father. "Dad," I whispered, "I am so ashamed. I did not want you to see me like this." Sergey hugged me tighter. "You silly girl," he said. "There is nothing to be ashamed of. You are not to blame for anything. He is the one to blame for treating you this way." But I could not find the words. I was afraid. Afraid that you would be disappointed in me. Afraid that you would not understand. "Anna, I am your father," Sergey replied. "I will always love and understand you, no matter what happens." He fell silent, giving me time to calm down. Then he spoke again. "You have to leave him, Anna. You cannot live in such fear anymore. It will destroy you." I looked up at him with teary eyes. "But where will I go?" I asked. "I have no one." "You have everything," Sergey replied. "You have me. You can come to my place. I will always have a place for you. And there, we will figure something out, find you a job, help you start a new life." I looked at my father. I saw so much love and support in his eyes that my heart felt lighter. I realized that I was not alone, that I had someone who would always be there to help and protect me. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered. "Thank you for everything." "Oh, come on, daughter," Sergey replied. "I am your father. It is my duty." He hugged me one more time and said, "I will come back for you tomorrow, Anna. Pack all your things." The next morning, I woke up with a feeling I had not experienced in what seemed like an eternity. It was not relief after a strong pain, but rather anticipation of a new day, filled with possibilities, not fear. The light penetrated through the loosely closed curtains, and it did not seem as annoying as usual. Before, it had only emphasized the shabbiness of the apartment and my own helplessness. Now, however, it seemed like a ray of hope breaking through the darkness. Ian was sleeping next to me, curled up in a ball and muttering something in his sleep. Usually, I tried not to wake him, afraid to disturb his sleep, as it could lead to another fit of anger. But today, the fear had receded. I got out of bed and went to the window. I had no clear plan in my head, only a firm intention to leave. To leave right now. Everything that had happened yesterday seemed like a dream. But my father's presence in the next room was tangible proof of the reality of what was happening. He was here to protect me, to help me get out of this quagmire. I opened the closet and started packing. No hysterics, no tears, just quiet, focused work. I packed the most necessary things into a suitcase: clothes, photographs, a few books I loved to reread. These books were my little sanctuary, my portal to another world where there was no room for humiliation and fear. I tried not to look at the things I had bought with Ian. Things that were supposed to symbolize our happy family life. They seemed alien to me now, saturated with lies and hypocrisy. I was leaving them here, in this apartment, like unnecessary junk, like a reminder of a past I wanted to get rid of forever. Sergey entered the apartment. He stood in the doorway, watching me, and his eyes showed pride and sympathy. He did not say a word, just came over and took a folded shirt from my hands. "Let me help," he said quietly. We packed in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I felt my resolve growing stronger with each packed item. I was no longer afraid of the future. I was looking forward to it. When the suitcase was ready, I went to the dressing table and opened a jewelry box. Most of it was gifts from Ian, expensive but soulless. I took only one thing, an old silver chain that my mother had given me for my 16th birthday. This chain was a symbol of love and protection for me, a symbol of my family. I put the chain around my neck and looked in the mirror. In the reflection, I saw a different woman, not the downtrodden and frightened Anna who had lived in this apartment for the past few years, but a strong and confident woman, ready to start a new life. When we left the room, Ian was still asleep. I stopped at the threshold and looked at him. There was nothing in his face that could evoke pity or sympathy in me, only indifference and fatigue. I turned and left the apartment without a word. My father walked beside me, carrying my suitcase. A taxi was waiting for us outside. We got in the car and drove towards the train station. The whole way to the station, I was silent. I looked out the window, watching the cityscapes flash by. I was saying goodbye to the past, to this life full of pain and humiliation. At the station, we bought tickets for a train to the city where Sergey lived. I sat by the window and leaned back in my seat. I felt tired, but it was a pleasant tiredness. The tiredness after a long and difficult job. When the train started moving, I looked out the window. I saw the city buildings receding, the familiar streets disappearing from view. I felt myself being freed from the burden of the past, shedding the shackles of fear and shame. The train rumbled steadily, carrying me away from the past, towards a new, free life. I closed my eyes and imagined the future. I saw myself as a strong and independent woman who was in charge of her own life. I saw myself as happy. At that moment, I felt my father's hand on mine. I opened my eyes and looked at him. In his eyes, I saw love and support. "Everything will be all right, daughter," he said quietly. "I will always be there." I smiled and squeezed his hand tightly. I knew he was telling the truth. No, I was not alone. I had a family, I had love, I had hope. And that was enough to start all over again. The train continued on its way, carrying me to a new life, free from fear and humiliation. A life where I could be myself, where I could be happy. A life I deserved.